That's fine. Thanks y'all for joining so far. Um, Quick question. I think if any of y'all want to be on camera, I think I have to promote you guys to a panelist. If anybody would like to do that, I think you can just raise your hand, or that technical raise your hand function. Let me know and I can promote you to the panelist so we can share the camera. I want to keep this as interactive as possible. By no means is this obligatory that you guys need to do, but just want to increase kind of some of the involvement. I'll be managing the Q&A portion throughout it too, so please feel free to drop any Q&A questions in there, or same thing, you can raise your hand at any point during the presentation. I think I can click the allow to talk function too, so Brad can answer questions as the slides kind of move on. But just want to give you guys that option. We'll wait another couple minutes before starting this, but just wanted to give you guys that heads up. And for those just joining, just going to give it another couple minutes, probably start at 2:03 Central, something like that. But if anybody wants to come on camera, just let me know via raising your hand or shooting me a message, and I'll promote you to a panelist. But no means is that necessary. I appreciate everybody joining us so far.
While we're waiting for everyone, if you'll put in the chat what entity you're with and what type of entity you're with, that would be useful information. We try to tailor our messages for those who are here to receive them. And a pitch, I know Corey's asking you to be on camera. That's my request. I'm better with a crowd. These things get kind of nerve-wracking when you're just staring into the ether. So if anybody wants to, at least nod that I'm being heard, that'd be appreciated. Not required, but it would definitely help.
I think we can see. All right, well, Brad, I think we can go ahead and get this going. Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Corey Brand. I work with Disaster Recovery Services. I'm not going to spend too much time on the intro myself, but Brad Bullion's going to take it from here. Appreciate you guys all joining in. And like I said, send any questions in the Q&A. Looks like the chat is disabled. That is helpful. Let me get that going. I'll get that Q&A going though, so you guys can send those questions on through. I'll fix the chat. And then Brad will get going from here. We want to have as many questions as possible. So appreciate the heads up. Thank you guys.
Okay, with that, we'll start. So my name's Brad Bullion. I'm also with Disaster Recovery Services. Just for a little history on me, I worked in school districts for many years as a CFO. I'm a CPA by trade, but have spent a lot of time in the project management side of things, building buildings and also repairing buildings for multiple disasters. I'm from the coast, the Southeast Texas coast. So I've personally been through as an owner or an entity through Rita, Ike, Imelda, and then finally Harvey. So have plenty of experience on that side, and then constantly gaining experience on the consulting side of this as well. So First, just want to tell you kind of who we are. There's a lot of words here, but basically, our core, we're financial consultants that help with FEMA and insurance claims. But we also have several specialty subgroups that can help with procurement, grants management, project management, both for disaster related projects and for new construction. And we're made up of accountants, architects, construction consultants, and all kinds of engineers, industrial hygienists. I mean, we have just a team of employees and consultants that work for us to help with whatever your needs are, no matter how big or small or intricate. And today we're going to talk about project management through a disaster and how you would use project management and those tools to be more prepared and ready in the case of something that actually hits. I will say that I tend to talk a little bit more in hurricanes because that's more of my experience, but this should apply to blizzards, freezes, hailstorms, tornadoes, fires, landslides, any type of disaster that you're dealing with. I will say, obviously, some of these make it more likely to be able to plan or at least know that there's a ramp up period. But all of these pieces will help regardless of what disaster you're talking about. So what is project management? Project management is basically, it's initiating, planning, executing, controlling, closing a project. And that's any project. That could be construction, that could be software implementation, or any type of implementations across the board for your company. So what does that look like in a disaster? It's doing the same thing with labor shortages, supply shortages, multiple hazards, and ever-changing scope. Also, it's doing it with a community that's scared, that also has gone through damage, and that is looking to you to be the resource to help them to solve their problem. I'll give you a quick little story. The last time I was on the entity side was through Harvey. And during Harvey, I worked at a small school district. The campus, we had flooded almost 25% of our community. We had one campus that had several feet of water in it that we had it's a 1960s campus that we had just finished dumping about $3 million in renovations in over the course of a couple summers. Had been open for 5 days, and then Harvey dumped 60 inches of rain on us. So we knew that the campus was flooded because my maintenance director had constantly been driving his bass boat there to check on the campus. And, it got closer, and then finally was flooded. Every administrator in our district had lost their house. And so I actually lived outside the district, and I was the only person that had a house that hadn't flooded. So we had an emergency board meeting. In that board meeting, it was in my house because it was the only place we could find to have it. We had power, but the city sewer system was out. The city water system was out. And I actually, since it was an open public meeting, I had community members sitting on my couch while we were at the kitchen table trying to figure out what in the heck we were going to do to get our district back on our feet. And so this is when it really helps to have plans because these are really unnerving situations that you can get yourself into. But using these tools and preparing for situations like this can really help you to get yourself out of the situation as quick as possible. So we have 3 steps, or 3 phases rather, when we talk about a road to recovery. The first step is to prepare, and we call that P for D. The second step is to respond, and that's your immediate response. It's just prior to disaster, if it is one that has some lead up time, and immediately after. And the third is long-term recovery. Something that you can't underestimate is the length of time that it takes to recover. That campus I was just speaking of is still under construction. The rebuild of it, part of it, is still under construction because it took about 2 it took about 3 years to get through the FEMA approval process. And then the school needed bonds to add to it before they were able to start construction. They'll actually open that campus this fall, and that was a 2017 storm. So be very patient because it does take some time. So first, let's talk a little bit about P4D. So P4D has 4 steps. You review. We'll go into depth on each of these in a minute, but you're going to review your district or your city or your county, your entity, whatever that may be, and kind of see where you're sitting. Identify areas for improvement and identify the people that are going to implement your plan, and then it's implementing your plan, putting it in place. Again, we'll talk about all those steps. And then finally, you have to monitor it because these things will get dusty if they're left on the shelf. And so you're going to constantly, at least yearly, look at it. Anytime you actually have a disaster, you do after action reports. But constant monitoring of these plans are important. So step 1 for the review process is to look over these items. And so first, let's start off with building inspections. And typically, if we're in a live room here, this is where I'm going to ask if there are any maintenance directors in the room. But if there's not any maintenance directors here, I would encourage you, next time you see one of your maintenance employees or your maintenance directors or facilities directors, ask them if they were to go onto the roof, what is the likelihood that every air conditioning on the roof has every screw in all of their inspection panels? I've yet to have one maintenance director tell me with confidence, yeah, ours are all completely there. And it doesn't mean that your guys are doing a bad job. You just have lots of people with hands on this equipment. And then whether it's air conditionings or anything else, it becomes difficult to make sure everything's buttoned up at all times. So part of this process is to do site inspections and do building inspections, to walk your roofs, to look at your transportation fleet and where it's being stored, to look at your grounds and what can blow away, or if we're in fire country, to look at our sprinkler systems or our vegetation and whatever hardening means to your area. It's taking a purposeful walk throughout your facilities to determine, what shape they're in and what things could we do to harden them, to make our buildings just a little bit more resilient. That's going to help us to recover that much faster. The next item I would say is personal property. If you've ever been through a disaster yourself, if you ever had a house flood or a house fire or even a wind event at your house, you know how daunting of a task it could be to identify all of your contents in your home. Now extrapolate that out to your public buildings or even a commercial building property, to where your contents quickly go from into the tens of thousands to the hundreds of thousands or millions of items. So I'm not saying you have to have a complete inventory of your contents, but the better of a grasp that you have beforehand, or pictures that you've taken, or documentation that these exist, the easier it's going to be to try to get dollars from them, whether you're trying to get them from the insurance company or FEMA. Your potential risks, we all kind of know what our potential risks are, but always it's good to take a second look and see what that looks like. Whether we're talking about fires or floods, hail, blizzards, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and those are just the natural ones. You could actually use this process for some of your man-made. It's not designed to think about man-made disasters, but I'm currently working a project in Tennessee right now. It's a water main break. It was from a freeze, but a water main break, and those can be very destructive. even in buildings that you would think would be more resilient than they are. You need to review your insurance coverage. This is a hot topic right now. Insurance has seen the hardest market that they've seen in years, I would say in decades, and everybody's looking to see what they can do with their coverage. It's really important to know what is covered and what is not, because a lot of us are going to be front and center in front of whether it's a school board, a city council, whatever your counties or parishes call the governing boards, to answer, why are we paying this much in insurance, or why didn't we have different coverage? It's much better to really know your coverage and then explain that to your governing bodies, to your bosses, to make sure they understand the exposure that they're under. We're all under a lot of pressure to get our premiums down, but we can't do that. But we have to do that very openly and making sure that everybody understands what that deductible is going to look like, or where our insurance cuts off. Or what are summary values? What's on our summary values, and is it high enough to cover the building that we're trying to cover the damage for? And this dovetails into prior FEMA losses. So some of you may or may not be aware of this, but if you've had prior FEMA losses, once you had a FEMA loss on a specific building for a specific type of loss, so if you had $1 million of hurricane damage to one of your buildings, and FEMA paid that $1 million recovery in the past, you now have a hurdle of sorts to where they're not paying that first $1 million layer again. And so if that first $1 million was your deductible 5 years ago, and now insurance coverages have gone up, and now you've got a $2 million deductible, the first $0 to $1 million that's not covered by your deductible will also not be covered for FEMA for that loss. Now, if it's a different loss, if it's flood, it would be covered unless you had a prior flood claim. And it's not for the entity, it's for the specific building. But you're now on the hook for $1 million to $2 million. And you need to make sure that A, you're aware of that, and B, that your boss or your board, your council is also aware of that. You also need to review your policy. For those of us that have been through disasters, realize that if it's part of your local policy to pay employees extra to come work during disasters. A lot of times you'll have a disaster, everybody shuts down, everybody goes home. The governing board or council will vote to make sure no one loses any salary, even though they're not working. And then you bring in some key personnel, maintenance personnel, custodial personnel to help clean or help fix the buildings. And you're going to pay them a hazard pay or time and a half on top of their regular pay to get them back working when nobody else is. Well, if that's part of your policy of how you're going to handle those situations in a disaster, in a declared disaster, then FEMA will actually pick up the bill for that extra expense. However, you can't change the policy post-storm or post-disaster and then recoup those funds. So it's important to take a look at those policies beforehand and make sure they're in place and they're ready to go. And then entity expectations. What does your entity expect on your recovery? How fast are they expecting to be back and operating? And this is going to differ depending on the size and the operations of your entity. But it's important to know about those and think about them, because there's no one cookie cutter approach that applies. So I'm going to stop and take a breath. Corey, do we have any questions that we need to answer or anything going on in the chat?
No questions or chat at this moment. I don't know if anybody wants to drop a question quickly into the chat or the Q&A, whatever's best. But Brad, one thing you were mentioning about the local policy, the payroll and stuff. I remember being on various disasters, and It was different across each city, county, school district, what everybody's policy was, and therefore what FEMA was willing to cover, in terms of what those payroll policies were. So I definitely want to encourage those to take a look at theirs. You can look at the FEMA Papa G they have out there as well to see how they're reading through these policies and how they're interpreting them. I'd be happy to share that PDF and drop it in the chat, but just very important just to take a look at these things because there is missing opportunity when something unfortunate does come across. But no questions or chat questions at this point.
Okay. Well, I have a slide here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so next is to identify the areas for improvement. Maybe you've possibly identified some areas to where there are mitigation possibilities, whether it's funded by your district or your entity to make your entity more resilient, or you're looking at 404 or 406 mitigation possibilities. A continuity, a business plan. If you're used to shutting down operations and moving everybody out of town, maybe this is something you thought of. But if not, who's going to make payroll and who's going to pay AP? Because even if your community is shut down and you are having to evacuate, or it's just a single building loss, people are still going to want to get paid. So people are still going to need to get paid, whether it's your AP or it's your local employees. So having that plan in place, is your business center and your accounting software, is it web-based? Is it locally housed? Where's it backed up? How do you get access to it? Can those people get access to it outside of your area? Do they have a laptop? Are they bringing their desktop with them? It doesn't take a lot, but taking a minute to put together that plan to make sure that, Stacy knows that it's her job to take her computer, if there's an evacuation order, that it's her job to take her computer and whatever papers that she needs with her, and she's to set up in a hotel room 200 miles away and report in and continue to work. And don't just assume that they know that. You need to communicate this with them and make sure that they understand that that's their responsibility or their team's responsibility, depending on the size of your entity. Shelters and evacuation support. I would assume this applies to fires, blizzards as well, but definitely a hurricane thing. Many times cities, counties will look to areas, school districts in particular, but sometimes it's the county trying to get with the city or the city trying to get with the county for a place to put shelteries and evacuees that have nowhere to go. And those are great things to do, but something you need to think about. Who's going to protect your building? Who's going to be there to make sure that those individuals that need that support are in the areas that you want them, and not possibly damaging other areas? How are they going to leave your building? How quickly are they going to leave your building? Who's responsible for that? Is this just a shelter of last resort and they move on, or a relocation plan? Or are they going to be able to stay there long term if they can't get back into their house? For those of us that have entities that have to reopen our services or have to rehabilitate our buildings to support the community, you need to make sure that maybe you have those MOUs and those talks pre-storm, because these things get really emotional during the storm. And everybody's heightened and everybody's nerves are frayed. So if you have this plan in place and you're able to negotiate this well on what we call a blue sky day, that should make that process go just a little bit smoother. And then, we talked about this a second ago, employee procedures and expectations. It's great to put these procedures in place, but it's key to make sure the employees know what their expectations are. if you expect your maintenance guys to return as soon as the evacuation order's up, then they need to know that. If your area is one that tends to keep citizens out and have extended evacuation orders, then you need to have a plan with your city county of how you're going to get your key people in when they're road blocking areas and only letting certain personnel in. I know that's something that Texas was really struggled with during Rita and Ike. And then we implement the plan. So, after you've reviewed everything and identified, you put together a strategy and you implement your disaster recovery strategy and plan. I will say that it needs to have a disaster org chart. That's one of the things that I'd really like to see. You need to make sure that everyone knows who's in charge. Not only who's supposed to show back up, but who's making the decisions. Where's my procurement person? Because as our team, we have a procurement team, and they'll like to tell everybody, procurement's one of the top reasons that people are asked to return FEMA dollars, is because from, I would not say poor procedures, but just missteps of people doing exactly what they think they're supposed to be doing during a disaster, but not realizing some of the nuances, even under extended contracting and emergency times of what the rules are and all of the pieces that someone's going to make you prove 2 years after the fact. When there's not a disaster, they get the opportunity to review what you did during a disaster. So making sure that procurement's done right and you have a procurement person on that team is imperative. But back to that org chart, when you're putting that org chart together, realize that it might not look like your normal one. It may not look like the one that you have day to day. There may be people that can't come back and they need to be replaced, and then there may be just different individuals. You might, we actually offer a service to do this for our clients. We'll put this P4D together, and we'll even be the project management. So, and this isn't this webinar is not a pitch for us, but it's just a way to say that you can, if you need that service, you can get project management from an outside party, and so they would need to be inserted into this org plan. So anyway, it's critical to have that and to use it and make sure everybody knows what it looks like. Standby contracts for critical services. So, as we were saying, we would be potentially one of those services that you would want. When I look back at some of the recoveries that I've done, I did 2 of them on my own. And then the last one with Harvey was just it was beyond my scope and my capacity. I had a job when the disaster hit. And so trying to do this became its own full-time job, and I needed help, and I needed staff, and I needed some surge employees. So having a FEMA compatible contract for a financial recovery consultant such as ourselves, having a standby contract with a remediation contractor, with a roofer. And I think I have a slide in a little bit that goes into a little bit more details of ones that you might want to consider. But having those in place pre-storm to where you're able to negotiate these pre-storm. Again, I've signed some of these contracts on hoods of trucks. And I've been lucky enough to have gotten tripped up in prior storms to where I realized that the mistakes that I made, the procurement hurdles that I had tripped over. And so I'm redlining without my procurement agent. I'm redlining for cost of percentage of cost line items in a contract and trying to explain to the contractor why I'm doing this when he's trying to go to 10 other people that aren't trying to do this to him. So having those negotiations when these guys are a little bit hungrier ahead of time really will help you and put you on a better path to having not just the contractors, but the contractors that you need with a compliant contract in hand. And then, implementing this, it's key to communicate this. We've said this a couple times, but today in the information age, I don't think you can over communicate expectations to your staff and to your governing body. And then maybe even to your community to some small extent. But to make sure everybody knows the risk, your potential exposure financially, it's so imperative to make them not be frustrated with you when the storm hits. And then you have to monitor it. You're going to have additions, deletions, significant changes, new employees. Your insurance coverage obviously updates annually, and you're going to have new buildings, you'll have old buildings. So you'll need to look at this and then see what changes that creates. Anytime you have a plan, you should go do an after action review. What worked, what didn't work, what do we need to change, what personnel do we need to change out, who did great, who do we need to promote. How did our remediation contractor perform? Do we want to replace them and get another standby contract? And then these standby contracts typically are going to run out annually. And so they're going to need to be updated annually to make sure that you have something fresh and compatible. I'm going to go to recovery partners real quick. So these are some of the things we talked about having pre-disaster contracts. These are some items or some areas where you might consider having one. Obviously restoration and mitigation is a big one. Maybe construction, a roofing company, HVAC, industrial hygienists. On major claims, whether it's FEMA or insurance, having an independent industrial hygienist to do your moisture mapping already in hand, that is not tied to the remediation contractor. So they're not trying to grow their scope to create more revenue, and is seen as independent by the insurance company and by FEMA, is really helpful to have them generating the scope of work for the remediation company. And then that way there's less arguing about what that scope creep looks like. And it's something that's recoverable both from insurance and from FEMA. Financial claims recovery consulting, that's a firm like ours. Construction claims consulting, project management, cities, counties, you do a lot in debris. So removal and monitoring, salvage. Those are all big ticket items for those that are responsible for the removal of debris for, a city or a county. So these are definitely not contracts, especially if they are significant ones to your entity, that you want to be negotiating after the storm, either immediately or well post-storm. These are things that you want to get off your plate and taken care of on your blue sky days. So this is a little homework for you. If you haven't done this yet, this is definitely something that we would suggest that you look into. Okay. Any more questions, Corey? Anything in the chat, or you still good?
Nope, you're still good.
Okay. All right. Again, I know this looks like hurricane only, but this is kind of any type of response for any storm that's coming. So this could be fire. If the fire's in your area, it's a dry season, and the winds are pushing things your way. Or hurricanes, this is more difficult on the -7 through 0 days with something like a tornado or a hailstorm. But we're constantly monitoring weather updates and trying to provide logistical support. So your project manager, whether it's outside or you're doing this internally, one's looking at the situation, assessing it. Two, doing a last-minute implementation of your plan, whether it's evacuation, it's extra building hardening, it's checking the sites. It's looking at those contracts that we had both with your, if you have a FEMA consultant and your mitigation crews and your roofing contractors. I mean, for me, if I'm doing this and I've got a client that's, somewhere in this cone of error, I'm saying, hey, just want you to know that we're watching this too, that I'm getting ready to stage myself, 100 miles outside of the high impact zone. I've already talked to your remediation company that we already have a contract with, you use Cotton. And I've talked to Tommy at Cotton, and your project manager is going to be Jacob. This is Jacob's cell phone number. Me, you, Jacob, we're going to meet at your high school or your city hall or whatever building it is at 2 o'clock after the storm rolls through. And we're going to start assessing your buildings, and we're going to go and we're going to get after it. And again, whether this is in-house or out, that's what this area should look like. And getting all of that prep done. It's not, well, let's see if it's going to hit. And then once it hits, well, who are we going to call? What are we going to do? And waiting for someone to show up to your doorstep. That's really when a lot of those contracting mistakes happen. And then sometimes you're at the mercy of what contractor shows up. So responding, that's day 0 through 30 plus. That's the immediate response. That's drying in your buildings. That's getting things shored up. That's fixing major infrastructure, whether it's water pumps, dams, roads, but getting things to where they're safe, they're usable, and further damage is not happening. Set up incident command of some sort to where again who's in charge. We have a story that we tell. One time a CFO invited us to their FEMA kickoff meeting, and then we show up and we're with the CFO. A second disaster recovery FEMA consultant is with the risk manager, and a third one is with the maintenance director or director of operations. That just shows that if you don't have clear communication of who's running the show, what's going on, who's aware of how resources can be squandered and wasted in the precious time to where you need to be making quick, decisive, informed decisions. You're going to need on-site project management. Again, whether this is third party or in-house, you have to manage your contractor. That's part of the federal program and part of the CFR that your contractors have to have oversight to make sure that they're doing what they need to do. You have to manage scope. If procurement is number one problem for FEMA trying to claw back money, the second one is scope variation. It's where FEMA thinks your damage should be one scope and you think it should be something else. It gets even more complicated when your contractor is doing a scope that you don't agree to, because they're not being managed appropriately. So you really have to stay on top of these guys. I'm not saying they're not good firms. There's a lot of great firms out there, and there's also a lot of bad ones out there. But they have to be watched, and you have to make sure that they're doing what you need them to do and doing it in the priority that you need them to do it. Which buildings, buildings need to be fixed first, what areas need to be addressed first. And you have to work with them to do that. And then you have to adjust with confidence. Things are going to happen. You're going to have a preposition contract that could possibly fail. I've heard stories of major remediation companies showing up, mobilizing, and then get called to bigger storms or bigger jobs, and they're just gone the next day. And so how are we gonna fix this? Again, where's my procurement person? How do I make sure that this second contract that I am signing on the hood is clean and is going to get us reimbursed when it comes time? Where's my insurance adjuster? Where's the person that knows what I need to know for FEMA? Unfortunately, when FEMA shows up to help, they are doing a massive scale up for these big storms. FEMA does not, and as taxpayers, we shouldn't want them to carry the kind of employees that they need for a Harvey or an Ian level storm 100% of the time. And so what they do is they scale up in a couple weeks and they deploy these people. And they're trying to do good work. And so we're not saying that they're bad or they're ill-willed, bad intention, or just bad employees. But the FEMA system is complicated. And you need to have someone on your team that really understands how to negotiate it. Because a lot of times, and I've seen this firsthand, you get bad advice from the FEMA personnel. It's not intentional. They just don't have the education or the training yet. And it takes 2 or 3 layers deep before someone says, wait a minute, that's not policy. So what you want is someone on your team who knows the policy better than the person with the FEMA badge on, that can help you and them in a calm, concerted effort to move your recovery along as swiftly as possible, because we know the way, because you now know the way that it has to go and how to manage that process. The recover, the longer part of this, this should say, be patient, be patient, be patient. The recovery can take a extremely long time. As I said, this building that you're looking at here was actually part of that Harvey rebuild project, and it took 3 years to get through FEMA. And it took 3 years, a FEMA consultant, a lobbyist, a couple congressmen, 2 senators, attorneys, myself and my team, the help of Tatum and several FEMA personnel. These things take time. Sometimes they take a pretty big push. You need to make sure you have someone to help you navigate this. Again, if you've got somebody in-house, that's great. But if not, make sure you find a team member that does have the experience, because it takes a lot of time. You're also going to need architect and engineering support, depending on the size and the scope of the building. Some of your rules, some of your laws, in Texas, I think after $100,000 of public money, that's not just a strictly 1-for-1 replacement, requires to have architecture stamps on things. You need procurement support. Again, procurement is super important to making sure that you keep those dollars. You could possibly need help with insurance claims prep, FEMA's claims prep, trying to get some 404 or 406 mitigation dollars out of each disaster. You might need help with construction management. You definitely need to make sure that your recovery is aligning with your recovery funds. And so FEMA's going to write a grant and say, this is what we're going to give you money for. Then on the other side of it, when you're turning this into a construction or a reconstruction or a remodel project, you need to make sure that those funds are getting allocated in a manner that you agree to in your obligated projects. Otherwise, they're not going to want to pay for it on the other end. And you need to balance funding sources. You could be looking at funding sources from insurance, from bond money, from FEMA, from grants. You need to make sure that you're not duplicating benefits. And then something else I would throw in here is you need to make sure that you're managing cash flow. Some of us have different levels of fund balances and cash flows. I know at the district that I was in, with just the temporary campus that we put in, it was $4 million in a time of the year where our cash flow was the lowest based off of how we're funded by the state. We had a $5 million fund balance, but I didn't have $5 million in the bank during that time. And it was a $4 million project. And so it takes a month and a half to be able to borrow money in Texas for some public entities. Depends on, what your rules are. But the point of that is that's just something that you might not be thinking of that you need to. FEMA's not going to pay you as soon as your project's done. If you haven't already gotten to scope agreement and you haven't already gotten to the point to where the money's in the state agency's hands waiting to be delivered to you. They don't pay in advance. It's paid on arrears. And so if you're months out from being able to get that money, then you need to be thinking about the cash flow side of things and making sure you're prepared for that. Because what you don't want are contractors showing up to board meetings complaining that they're not getting paid. So a few pro tips. Pictures and videos are great. We encourage you to have pre-disaster videos. You know, if feasible, if you took a picture or video annually or biannually, as in every 2 years, not twice a year, of your buildings, roofs, and perimeter, and then possibly even going through your classrooms or your offices, your spaces, to show what they look like pre-disaster. Definitely take pictures of damage immediately and good, and make sure you take them with the perspective of you can tell what the picture is. You know, we get lots of pictures of, oh, this handrail's damaged. And they want to get close to show the damage, but you have no idea where that handrail is in space. So taking a couple shots, one a little far off to where you can show where the picture is in the relative world, and then kind of going in and showing a little bit more accurate picture of the damage in particular will help when you're trying to get claims for those. And then take pictures of your repairs. I actually heard a story, I believe this was Houston ISD, if not, it was a Houston entity, to where they had a hurricane damage some rooftop units. They had them replaced. And then 12 years later, a second hurricane came and re-damaged the units. Well, the unit had failed after about 8 or 10 years, and they replaced the replacement unit. So FEMA was looking for proof that the repair was ever done. And they couldn't provide a picture of the unit that was put on 12 years ago. And so they ran into issues of, well, we don't even know if you actually did the work. It's amazing what they can ask for after the fact. So take pre-disaster pictures, take pictures of the damage, and then when you do the repair, snap a picture of that as well. Nameplates are great. And again, perspective of where you are, that just kind of helps, have any arguments. We've talked about procurement. Procurement is huge. Make sure you do department checks. Cost plus, there's a moratorium on cost plus. So make sure it's excluded for any project that you think is going to have FEMA recoverable dollars. Not important if it's an insurance project. If it's insurance only, they're used to seeing cost plus. They like to see, base cost plus 20, 10 and 10. But if it's going to be FEMA eligible, make sure it's not there. Make sure it's 2 CFR 200 compatible. And if you don't know what that is, talk to your procurement professional. If you don't have one, talk to us. We'll help you. And address all of the procurement on the front, or as much procurement as you can on the front end. One thing I didn't mention is you do have an extended period right after a disaster. Again, we're talking about potentially federally funded projects. You have an extended period that allows you to not use competitive pricing for emergency repairs. 2 things. One, this does not eliminate the need for department checks. This does not eliminate the need for cost plus or a bunch of other provisions into CFR 200. It just doesn't require you to go out for bid. However, that is for the emergency piece only. That is for getting your building secure, dry, and damaging materials out of the building. If you're moving into repairs and you feel like those repairs are going to be used for FEMA paid for with federal dollars, you need to hit a pause button. You need to get with your procurement team, and you need to be looking at putting together a competitive project. Even if it's within the extended period, you're going to start that construction on day 28. That's not the intent of the policy, and that will trip you up. The DDD is what FEMA calls damage descriptions and dimensions. it is what they base your recovery scope off of. It happens early on in the project, and you need to make super sure that it's accurate, because especially with their new delivery model, the DDD builds the scope of work, and the scope of work builds the project dollars. And so definitely something to pay attention to. And then you need to make sure once that is set, that when you are doing repairs, that the repairs are based off of damages tied to this DDD, and not on other items, or they won't get paid. You need to make sure that you're not consolidating your invoices or your bids. FEMA will operate this, and most insurances as well, by building. And so they're going to want to see cost by building. So don't make the mistake of saying, hey, I've got these two buildings, they're side by side, just give me a price for both of them. You need to make sure all of your invoices is singular per building, or that will also trip you up when you go to get reimbursed. And that's our webinar. Do we have any follow-up questions?
Nothing in here, but I want to give a few minutes to see if anybody has a specific question on here. And, as Brad was mentioning, if anyone wants to have a call or has any more questions on any specifics that were covered on here, from, reviewing your insurance policy provisions, for reviewing your procurement policies as well, standby agreements, anything, happy to have a call. Not something we're charging for, just want to be a resource. Got a couple of questions here. Brad, first one is, can cooperative contracts be used in the exigent period?
Yes. Not only can cooperative contracts be used during the exigent period, cooperative contracts can be used at any point in time. There is a myth saying that 2 CFR 200 and FEMA do not like cooperative contracts. That is not correct. However, cooperative contracts, and I'll get a little bit over my skis here. I'm not the purchasing guru of our team, and we do have one, but I've listened to her talk a lot, and I stayed in a Holiday Inn last week. I mean, a Holiday Express last week, so I feel pretty confident with this answer. They're not all created equally, and when you use a cooperative contract, you cannot give up your responsibility to make sure that the contract was done appropriately. So any steps you would take for a federal contract, you need to take with the purchasing co-op. You need to go and look at their review. You need to make sure they have hub vendor outreach. You need to pull down their responses. You need to check debarment yourself, even if they had already checked debarment. And depending on the size, you might also have to do independent estimates or reasonableness scope. And again, she can get into the specifics of this better. So just because the co-op says we're federally compliant or compatible doesn't mean you get to take their word for it. But there are some outstanding contracts out there and really good co-ops that do a good job. And at that point, you can use them in the extension period and in the regular period. You just need to make sure that you check all the boxes off as if you would with a regular procurement. And then the other question is, can we get a copy of the presentation? And yes, of course, Corey will email that out afterwards.
Yeah, we'll make sure to send a copy of the slides as well as a recording to this. I'll try and get that out in the next couple of days or so. I see Patricia asked a question: if we're part of a purchasing cooperative. The answer is yes. We hold 3 different cooperative contracts: HGAC, BUY, Choice Partners, and Equalis Group. And I'm happy to include those contracts and links and information in the follow-up too, for anyone that's got a question. But yeah, cooperatives and procurement is a specialty of ours. Shelley Vineyard's great at what she does and constantly hosts plenty of trainings in that space too, and happy to make sure to make those available. And if anybody, when I do my follow-up, if you have any questions and want more information on like procurement stuff, I may be able to find some webinar recordings that Shelley's already done and presentations to provide that too for convenience. Let's see, anybody else? Any additional questions? Well, we'll stay on here, but we don't have anything additional. You guys are free to jump. Appreciate the time. Brad will stay on here until everybody has signed off.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate y'all attending. Gidry asked if we're public adjusters. No, we are not public adjusters. We do help with insurance claims prep. We do that quite often. We actually have a commercial division that focuses nothing but insurance claims. So we'll work with you and the insurances adjuster and their consultants to help prep the claim and even manage the project for you. But we are not independent adjusters and we do not do public adjusting. We also find that, an insurance adjuster, do we still have Gidry on?
Yeah.
Anyway, we will find that, a public adjuster, once you add them to the mix, everybody gets kind of on edge and it creates, I wouldn't say aggressive situation, but it really changes the dynamic. Whereas we're accustomed to working with the adjuster to help make the claim go well. And we don't get a percentage of the fee. We've got we get paid by the hour to do the work, but we don't take a portion of the claim.
Yeah, we're strictly there to help represent the policyholder. And yeah, a lot of our, if not all of our costs are usually recoverable through commercial insurance policies, as well as, FEMA public assistance that's available, or these other federal grants too. Majority of these costs are covered by some sort of coverage, and that's part of the insurance review checklist that we do with our clients, or even in other firms that we're not working with, is make sure you have those professional fees and certain things built in. And usually it's a nominal cost, if anything at all. So if something happens, you can have someone like us go to bat for you in these scenarios. Let's see, Brad, we got a question. Is there a checklist for steps to use a cooperative contract during a disaster to make sure you can utilize FEMA dollars for purchases?
Corey, do we have a presentation that Shelley's recorded?
I believe so, and that's what I was trying to allude to when I was mentioning that, is we've got a lot of content related to this that should already be made, that I can definitely include in a follow-up for these questions.
Yeah, I would say that if your questions are procurement specific, that you definitely tune into one of those procurement pieces, because she goes into depth on purchasing co-ops and regular procurement. I've seen those things go anywhere from 1 to several hours. So she's definitely a vault of knowledge. And if you just got individual questions, feel free to email Corey or myself. We can, have a more personalized conversation on what you need to do, or put you in touch directly with Shelley and her team.
Yeah, and each cooperative has, their own additional education materials on how to access them during a disaster or any type of event. In terms of joining one, it's usually fairly simple. You just sign up and register, and then you can access the various contracts that are there. But granted, yeah, we do advise the people that we work with usually a couple of different steps, like you mentioned, sometimes getting quotes, estimates, using multiple cooperatives, just going above and beyond than just solely relying on a cooperative. Because like Brad mentioned, there's a lot of different individuals that you may come across with or in contact with at FEMA, for example, that may have different understandings, interpretations, preferences that can just bottleneck things for a little bit amount of time, and eventually the right answer will always come to fruition. It could just take a lot of time depending on the scenario. So covering your bases as much as possible. is important, but just based on the questions we got, I'll make sure to include as much information around the cooperative contract and purchasing as possible in the follow-up.
And you can also use cooperative contracts for a pre-position contract. So you don't have to wait until the storm. So, I mean, you could use the time this summer. I mean, let's say you wanted us to provide services for you and you wanted, you know, a remediation contractor. We could provide those, we could, you know, set up a contract under that. And so could the remediation contractor, and get you something that's, you know, FEMA compatible and ready for, you know, and hopefully the unlikely event, or hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does happen, that you'll be ready for it. And you're not trying to scramble and do that when internet's limited, you can't remember our phone number, you're looking for an email or a presentation you did in May. You know, it costs you a little bit of time, but do it now. Do it in June, do it in July, and get it all squared away. And if you need help, let us know. I mean, you know, we can help you put those contracts together. Put you in touch with Shelly, and she'll make sure it gets done right.
All right, we're at 3:01 Central. Any other questions? If not, feel free to drop, and I'll get to working on my follow-up. Brad, we can drop in a couple minutes if not everybody else does, in case people are away from their computer or preoccupied. All right, I'm gonna drop. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.